Thank you so much, James. Hi, everyone. So I want to start with a problem. And for the next few minutes, I want you to pretend it's your problem. It's April 1970. Apollo 13 is about 200,000 miles from Earth when an oxygen tank explodes. Now, up until that moment, the mission was about getting 3 astronauts to the moon. Now, the mission is much simpler. Get them home alive. So the astronauts move into the lunar module and start using it as a kind of emergency lifeboat. They're conserving electricity, they're losing water, they're cold, and then carbon dioxide starts building up. So now they have another problem. If they can't scrub enough carbon dioxide out of the air, they could survive the explosion and still die before they make it home. And here's the almost absurd part. They have filters. They have perfectly usable filters. They're just the wrong shape. The command module uses square lithium hydroxide canisters, and the lunar module needs round ones. So humanity has managed to put 3 people 200,000 miles into space, and their survival is suddenly threatened by what is essentially the world's most consequential square peg round hole problem. Now, imagine you're one of the engineers on the ground. You cannot send them a replacement. You can't manufacture something and deliver it. You have to solve the problem using whatever happens to be inside that spacecraft. So the team on Earth starts working with the same materials the astronauts have available. Plastic bags, cardboard, tape, pieces of the spacecraft's equipment and documentation. And somehow, from that completely ridiculous assortment of materials, they create an adapter. They build it on Earth first because they need to know it will work. Then somebody has to turn what they've just invented into instructions clear enough for 3 exhausted astronauts to reproduce in space. The astronauts follow those instructions, and they build this odd-looking little contraption, and it works. Look at it. Seriously, this thing helped keep human beings alive in space. Now, it doesn't exactly scream cutting-edge aerospace engineering. It kind of looks like something one of my students would have handed me and said, "I promise, Miss McGriff, it's part of the project." NASA nicknamed it the mailbox. And I love this story. And it's not because these people somehow succeeded without technology. They were flying to the moon. There was technology everywhere. What fascinates me is what happened when the technology they had was no longer enough. There wasn't an existing procedure that perfectly matched the situation. Nobody could look up a tutorial called How to Save Apollo 13 After an Oxygen Tank Explodes. They had to understand what was actually happening and pull from knowledge they already possessed, collaborate with people, test an idea, communicate it, and then make a judgment about whether it was good enough to trust with 3 lives. That's human ingenuity. And I want you to remember that weird little cardboard box, because we're going to come back to it. So today we're talking about artificial intelligence. But the question I want sitting underneath this entire hour isn't, what can AI do? You've probably sat through plenty of presentations about that already. I want to ask something harder. When every student has access to extraordinary intelligence, what will distinguish the human holding it? Okay, so let's jump from 1970 to right now. And I don't think I have to convince anyone here that AI is becoming extraordinarily capable. You can hand an AI a messy set of notes and ask it to organize your thinking, brainstorm, code, translate languages, or have it explain something at exactly the level you need. And the thing is, we're still early, very early, and that part is important. Because I sometimes hear arguments about human value that go something like, don't worry, AI can't do this particular thing. And every time I hear that, I get a little nervous. because that feels like betting humanity on an AI product roadmap. That is not a bet I want to make. Every few months, something that supposedly required 10 years of uniquely human expertise suddenly has an AI demo attached to it. So I don't want this hour to depend on AI hitting some permanent ceiling. Let's assume the opposite. Let's assume AI becomes much, much better. Then what? Sam Altman made a provocative comment recently. He suggested that a child born today may grow up never being smarter than AI. Now, you could spend the rest of the webinar arguing over what the word smarter even means, and frankly, that would be a pretty good discussion. But I want to use the idea as a thought experiment. Suppose a 5-year-old growing up today eventually has access to a system that can recall more, calculate faster, and write faster and be more competent at many intellectual tasks in seconds. What should that child spend 20 years becoming good at? And that's not a rhetorical question. I actually want your answer. So we're going to do a chat waterfall. Type your answer, but don't press enter yet. Woo, wait just 1 second. The question is, when answers become cheap, what becomes expensive? Or another way of saying it, when intelligence becomes abundant, what becomes more valuable? Give me a word or a short phrase. Don't send it yet. I will let you know. In 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, I love this. I am seeing social emotional learning, connection, wisdom, human nature, creating. Love it. These are awesome. Great. Great job, guys. Creativity. Wonderful. And I bet if we froze this chat right now, we could build an entire curriculum out of what you just wrote. And this is the conversation I think education desperately needs, because the least interesting version of this conversation is humans versus machines. Who wins? That's almost like asking whether a person or a calculator is better at mathematics. Better for what? Doing which part? In what situation? The more interesting question is, what happens when a very capable human has access to a very capable machine? And then, what happens when someone who hasn't developed much judgment, curiosity, expertise, agency has access to that same machine? Those are not necessarily equivalent partnerships. And that's what I want to explore today. Not human versus AI, human with AI. And specifically, what does the human need to bring? Okay, so a personal story. A little while ago, I was traveling in Germany with my friend Tabby, and we were standing inside this beautiful castle together. And there was one of those moments where you don't really have anything to say because you're just looking around. And the architecture, the details, the scale of it, it was just incredible. And we were standing there taking it all in. And then Tabby leaned over and whispered, "How did we do this before ChatGPT?" And I keep coming back to that memory because it's hilarious, but it's also kind of a serious question. How did we? I mean, at some point, somebody looked at a pile of stone and had to understand enough about materials, geometry, craftsmanship, construction, and create something that would still be standing there centuries later. Nobody could say, "ChatGPT, I'm attaching a photo of this hill, build me a castle." Human beings have spent thousands of years figuring things out. We've learned from other people, we watched masters work, we made terrible attempts, and taught the next generation so they wouldn't have to start over. And eventually, that accumulation of knowledge became everything from architecture to modern medicine to programming to spaceflight. And I think sometimes the conversation around AI accidentally makes us forget just how trainable human beings are. We aren't born knowing how to read or design a bridge or teach 30 completely different little humans in one room on a Tuesday afternoon in February. We become capable, and that's important. because the arrival of AI doesn't mean humans suddenly need to stop becoming capable. If anything, I think the opposite is true. We have this extraordinarily new amplifier, which is wonderful, but what are we amplifying? And here's where I start getting a little uncomfortable, because AI can make it easier to do something without necessarily making me better at doing it. And those are two different things. All right, so let me give you a classroom scenario. Two students get the same assignment. They're asked to take a position on a complicated issue and support it with evidence. Student A starts writing and very quickly realizes they don't actually know what they think. They write a paragraph, it doesn't work, they reread it, they look for different sources, they tweak their support and their argument, and they get irritated, they keep changing directions, and then 25 minutes later, what they produced is fine. It's not going to win a Pulitzer, but in those 25 minutes, something happened inside that student's head. Now, student B takes the same assignment and asks AI, write a sophisticated argument about this topic using supporting evidence. 30 seconds later, student B has the better paper. If you were grading only the artifact, there's a good chance student B wins. So let me ask you, who performed the task better? Probably B. Who learned more? Well, we actually don't know, and that's the problem, because performance and learning are not always the same thing. The OECD has been looking closely at this distinction in education. Their 2026 Digital Education Outlook warns that general purpose AI can help students produce stronger, immediate results, while, if we're not careful, allowing them to bypass some of the cognitive activity that creates durable learning. And I think that gives us an incredibly important question to start asking whenever AI enters the classroom. What was this assignment actually for? Not what were students supposed to turn in? What was supposed to happen inside them? Take writing. If what I need is a polished paragraph for a newsletter, I am thrilled that AI can help me get there faster. But if I'm assigning writing because I want a student to wrestle with evidence, clarify an idea, communicate what they believe in, then the writing is doing more than creating a paragraph. The process is part of the lesson. And it's the same thing with coding. If I need a little script written for work, for my Excel spreadsheet, fantastic, just give me the code. But if I'm teaching a student computational thinking, debugging, systems, orchestration, the struggle to understand why something broke may be exactly the part I don't want to remove. So AI forces us to get much more precise. What part is drudgery? What part is practice? And where does making something easier actually remove the experience that was building the skill? I use a very simple phrase for this with educators: brain before bot. It doesn't mean never use AI. Quite the opposite. It means give your brain a chance to enter the room before you invite the AI in. Here's the routine. Before asking AI for help, pause long enough to answer 3 questions. What do I already think? Where am I unsure? What would I genuinely like help thinking through? That's it. You can do this in 30 seconds. Let's try it. Okay, so let's think of one real problem in your work right now. Maybe a student isn't engaging. Maybe you're trying to communicate a difficult idea. Just choose one. Now, before AI gets anywhere near it, what do you already suspect might be true? And what is the question underneath the question? That's a completely different starting point than fix this for me. Now I have something to bring into the conversation, and when I do use AI, I can decide what role I want it to play. Sometimes, yes, I want an answer, and there's absolutely nothing noble about spending 45 minutes formatting a table if a machine can do it in 15 seconds. But sometimes I want resistance, and that's where AI gets really interesting. Instead of give me the solution, try a prompt like, I have an idea, find the assumption I'm most likely to be missing. Or ask me questions until I can explain why I believe this. or take the strongest reasonable position against mine. Now, the AI is not removing thought, it's pushing against it. Microsoft Research and Carnegie Mellon studied hundreds of real examples of knowledge workers using generative AI, and one thing they found was that the more people trusted the AI to be correct, the less critical thinking effort they reported putting into the task. Now, that doesn't mean AI kills critical thinking. The same research suggests the thinking starts to shift. Less time may go into generating the first draft, more responsibility moves towards evaluating, verifying, integrating, deciding whether something is appropriate, and recognizing when the output doesn't fit the reality. And that makes sense to me. So I don't think we should be asking, should students use AI? That question is already too old. I think we should be asking, which parts of thinking are we willing to outsource, and which parts are we deliberately trying to strengthen? Because convenience is wonderful, but convenience has a weird side effect. If we're not intentional, it can remove the reps, and the reps matter. I can hire someone else to do 20 push-ups, and they may do gorgeous push-ups, perfect form, but my arms don't care. Somebody else doing the work does not give me the adaptation. Our brains aren't exactly biceps, obviously, but the principle is useful. Sometimes difficulty is a design flaw, and sometimes the difficulty is doing something important to us. Education has to know the difference. So this is where I want to give you the first half of my framework. And as I've thought about what we need in an AI-rich world, I've started separating two things. These are qualities we develop as people, and there are capabilities we deliberately learn. And I call this first group HEART, H-E-R-T. Not because these are fuzzy, sentimental human skills. HEART is about the person who walks into the partnership with AI. Who is holding this tool? What do they do when a plan falls apart? How do they treat people? So let's walk through it. So H is high agency and hope. Agency to me is the reflex to ask, what can I do from here? Not, can I control everything? Obviously not. Apollo 13 is a pretty dramatic example of that. Those engineers could not undo the explosion. They couldn't magically put the spacecraft back into its original condition. But they could keep asking, what is still possible? What can we try? That is high agency. And I'd argue that this becomes even more important when AI is everywhere, because there are two very different habits we could form around these tools. The first one is, I don't know, AI, take over. The second is, I don't know yet, AI, help me explore my options. They sound similar, but psychologically they're definitely not. One hands over responsibility, the other expands the person's ability to act. Think about the student who says, I don't know what to do. We've all heard it probably a few dozen times a day. That sentence can become the end of the road, or the start of a routine. Okay, what could you try next? Maybe you ask someone, maybe you break the task into something smaller. And AI might be one of those moves. The goal isn't to stop students from asking for help. The goal is to build people who have more than one move. And that's where hope fits for me. Hope isn't sitting there thinking everything is going to be fine. Hope says, this isn't working, but I still have choices. That is something we can practice. The next one that I would like to go for is E. Now, E stands for emotional intelligence and empathy. And this one can get oversimplified very quickly. You'll hear people say, AI has intelligence, humans have empathy. For sure, maybe, but AI can also generate incredibly compassionate language, which can be hard for students to differentiate. It can coach someone through a conversation, and it can help us inspect one. So I'm less interested in arguing over whether a machine is really empathetic. I'm more interested in what human life demands from us. You teach actual people. You and actual people are messy. A student can understand the content and still be scared to speak. Someone can be technically wrong in a conversation and still be carrying something you need to understand before you're going to help them. A teacher knows that the exact same feedback can motivate one student and shut another one down completely. That's judgment, and there's something AI can do here that I actually love. It can give students a place to practice perspective talking. So imagine a student has designed a solution to a community problem, and instead of asking AI, is my idea good? They could say, role play a parent who would be affected by this decision and has concerns I haven't considered. Don't tell me how to fix it, ask me questions. Now the AI is helping the student encounter another point of view. But the student still has to listen. They still have to decide what matters. Empathy isn't producing empathetic words, it's allowing another person's reality to change how you think and act. All right, A, adaptability and agility. I think this one is going to become enormous because we have no idea what some of our students' jobs will look like 20 years from now. I'm not sure we know what some of our own jobs will look like 5 years from now. But that's not actually new. Humans have always had to adapt. What's different is the speed. So rather than trying to predict every tool our students will need, I want them to have experiences where the rules change and they discover they can handle it. This is easy to build into a classroom. Give students a challenge. Let them start, then halfway through, change one meaningful constraint. Maybe the budget gets cut. Maybe the audience changes. Maybe a piece of information they relied on turns out to be wrong. Now the task isn't just, can you solve the problem? It's, what do you do when the problem stops being the problem you prepared for? And AI can actually make this incredibly fun. You can use it to generate realistic curveballs, and suddenly AI isn't making the activity easier, it's helping you create a more adaptable learner. And that's the reversal I want us to keep noticing today. We don't only have to ask how AI saves effort, we can ask, how could I use AI to create better practice? All right, R is for resilience and reflection. And I pair these because I don't think resilience means endlessly pushing through something without thinking. Sometimes persistence is admirable. Sometimes you've just spent 3 hours using the wrong strategy. Reflection is what allows resilience to become learning. When something fails, I want students to get curious about it. Not just, that didn't work, but what did that result tell me? You can build a whole culture around that. A project goes badly, before they fix it, ask students to explain why they think it failed. A student gets an answer wrong, let them inspect the mistake before showing the solution. And AI is great here. Imagine a student is learning photosynthesis. So instead of typing, explain photosynthesis to me, they say, I'm going to explain photosynthesis to you from memory. After I finish, don't give me the correct answer. Ask me 2 questions about the parts of my explanation that seem incomplete. I love that because now the machine becomes a mirror. The student's thinking becomes visible to the student, and that is metacognition. The student isn't only learning photosynthesis, they're learning something about how they know what they know, and that is an incredibly transferable skill. Let's move on to T. T is thoughtfulness and truth-seeking. Now, I originally had critical thinking sitting here when I was doing the research, but I think what I actually care about is the disposition underneath critical thinking. Do you not want to know what's true badly enough to question an answer you like? That's different. I don't want students who distrust AI by default, and I don't want students who believe AI by default. I want the students whose instinct is interesting. How do we know? Because AI presents us with a very strange psychological challenge. It's fluent. And when something speaks fluently, we tend to assign it competence. If somebody looks you directly in the eyes and confidently explains something in beautiful sentences, it is surprisingly easy to think they must know what they're talking about. AI can do the textual version of that beautifully. So students need habits for checking, not a 47-point verification checklist every time they ask for a dinner recipe, but rather an instinct for stakes. How important is this? What happens if it's wrong? Where does this come from? What is missing? That's truth seeking. One classroom phrase I love is, the first answer is a hypothesis. AI gives you an answer. Great, now let's test it. A textbook gives you an answer. Great, let's understand why. I give you an answer. Please feel free to verify me too. That's heart, guys. High agency and hope, emotional intelligence and empathy, adaptability and agility, resilience and reflection, thoughtfulness and truth-seeking. 5 things I'm less interested in measuring on a standardized test, and very interested in developing in a person. Heart answers who is holding the tool. But here's where we have to be careful. I don't want us leaving an AI conversation believing that being kind and adaptable is enough. Humans also need to know how to do things. So this is the other half. Human is about developed capability. And this part matters to me because I've seen a strange reaction to AI that almost sounds like, well, AI can code now, so why learn coding? AI translates, why learn another language? AI can summarize a book, why read one? And I understand the question, but I think it confuses access to a capability with possessing the capability yourself. We still need knowledgeable humans. We may just need to think differently about what knowledge is for. So human gives us 5 areas. Let's start with H, humanities and human context. H might surprise people in a future skills framework. You might expect me to start with coding. I think history, language, literature, ethics, culture, storytelling all become incredibly useful when machines are generating more of our information and artifacts. Not because these subjects are magically AI-proof, but because they help humans contextualize. Technology can give me 10 possible solutions. History may tell me where we've tried 3 of them before. A model can generate a persuasive speech. Understanding rhetoric helps me recognize what that speech is doing to me. AI can translate my sentence into Mandarin. Knowing something about Chinese culture changes whether what I say actually lands the way I intended. Daniela Amodei, one of the founders of Anthropic, studied literature. And when she was asked whether she'd still make the choice in the age of AI, she argued that the humanities may become more important, not less. And that fascinates me because maybe the future isn't STEM replacing humanities or humanities saving us from STEM. Maybe we finally need both. We need people who understand what technology can do and people who can ask what it means for human beings. If students are solving a problem with AI, here's one question that can completely change the activity. What human context might the AI not have enough of? Now we're talking about culture, history, local knowledge, the needs of the actual people involved. Suddenly, the student has something to contribute that isn't just better prompting. Let's move on to U. And U is for understanding systems. And this is where I put coding, computational thinking, engineering, scientific reasoning, all of that, and how they interact with each other. And yes, I still think students should learn to code. AI can write code, that's not a contradiction. If anything, AI-assisted coding makes it easier for students to get to the interesting part faster. They can build, then we can ask, why does it work? What's happening underneath? What happens if we change this? Where could it fail? And one of my favorite emerging ideas in education is vibe coding. Students can describe something they want to create and use AI to help build it. And that's phenomenal. Fantastic. But I would add a rule. If AI helps you build it, you have to be able to explain it. And then, if you really want them to learn, make them break it. I'm serious. You built an app? Great. Break one feature on purpose. Now predict what the failure will affect, find the problem, repair it. That's systems thinking. And systems thinking isn't just programming. A school is a system, a human body is a system, and understanding relationships between parts is one of those abilities that travels across disciplines. The next one is M, managing risks, ethics, and decisions. Here's something I don't think AI makes disappear: consequences. An AI can recommend something. Somebody still lives with what happens next. So I want students to practice deciding, not just generating. A very easy routine is accept, modify, reject. Give the AI a real scenario and ask it for a recommendation. Then the student chooses. Maybe they accept it. Maybe there is one thing they would change. Maybe they think the entire suggestion is inappropriate. But now becomes the important part. Why? Defend the decision. Let's think of a scenario. Okay, so imagine an AI recommends a policy for allocating a limited school budget, or suggests how a city should reduce traffic. Don't ask, was AI right? Ask, what would you do with this recommendation? That's much closer to how adults increasingly work with AI. The machine produces possibilities. The person needs to understand the stakes. All right, let's move on to A. A is AI and data literacy. We absolutely need this. Our students should learn how these tools work at an age-appropriate level. They need to know AI can be useful and still wrong. They should understand bias, data verification, protecting sensitive information. But I also think we need to dramatically expand what we mean by using AI. Because if AI is only the machine we go to when we want a finished answer, we're using about 5% about what's interesting about it. AI can be a critic, can be a partner, tutor, role player, brainstorming partner, and yes, sometimes just write that super boring email you don't want to write. Guilty. The skill isn't memorizing magical prompt formulas. Models are already getting better at understanding messy human instructions. The deeper skill is learning to manage the interaction. What am I trying to accomplish? What information does the model need? What should I do myself first? What part of the output needs my judgment? That's collaboration literacy. Now, N is for nested domain expertise, and in plain English, it just means know something deeply. And this might be the least fashionable advice in the age of AI, and I think it's some of the most important. Because the better AI gets at giving us information, the easier it becomes to believe information and knowledge are the same thing. They're not. Expertise creates a structure in your head. If you've spent years teaching children to read and you hear something in an AI-generated literacy lesson that a novice may not notice, that's because you have expertise. If you're a programmer, you may look at generated code and immediately think, this technically works, but the architecture is going to become a nightmare. If you know history deeply, you notice when a neat AI summary strips away the political or cultural context that changes the interpretation. Without knowledge, it's really difficult to have judgment. So what I want students to use AI to do is explore widely, like absolutely widely. But I also want them to go deep somewhere, learn a field well enough to have taste, learn it well enough to disagree intelligently, and well enough so that AI can become a collaborator rather than a substitute for knowing what you're doing. And that is human. Humanities and human context, understanding systems, managing risk, ethics and decisions, AI and data literacy, nested domain expertise. And here's how I think about the relationship between the two frameworks. Hard asks, who am I becoming? Human asks, what am I becoming capable of? And then AI asks, what becomes possible when I bring both of those things to the machine? Let's make this concrete. Imagine I need to teach a lesson about ecosystems. So I open an AI tool and I type, write me a lesson plan about ecosystems. What happens? Probably something perfectly respectable. I'll get an objective, some vocabulary, an activity, an exit ticket. If the model is feeling festive, maybe a little leaf emoji. There's nothing wrong with that. But watch what happens if I bring more thinking into the interaction. Instead, I say, I'm teaching ecosystems and I have a concern. Students are often able to define words like producer, consumer, and food chain without really understanding how interconnected the system is. I want them to experience what happens when one part changes. Now, before you suggest anything, ask me 3 questions about my students and the constraints of my classroom. Now we've changed the conversation. The AI may ask me how old they are, how much time I have, what materials are available, maybe whether they've already learned food webs. I answer. Then I say, give me 3 possible activities, but for each one, tell me where the students are actually doing the cognitive work. I don't want an activity that looks engaging but has me doing all of the thinking. That's a very teacher question. AI didn't invent that goal, AI brought it. Then I might say, I'm leaning toward option 2. Don't agree with me yet. What might I be underestimating? Okay, question for you. Did the AI get smarter? No, the machine is the same. What changed was the quality of the human contribution. I knew what misconception I cared about. I knew something about how learning works. I knew my students. I had a reason for wanting productive struggle. And instead of asking the AI to make the decision, I deliberately kept some of that decision making for myself. That's the pattern I want our students to learn. And here's why I don't think prompt engineering is ultimately the big skill. Prompts will get easier. The systems will understand us better. Eventually, saying the exact clever phrase may matter much less. But knowing what you want, understanding the situation, that's harder to automate away from the relationship. Maybe the most sophisticated AI user isn't the person who can make the AI do the most. Maybe it's the person who has developed a really good instinct for what should the AI do and what is still mine to do. I want to end where we started. That ridiculous little box. Apollo 13. If that accident happened today, would I want the engineers using AI? Of course. I would want them to use every useful tool we have. Run simulations, search enormous amounts of technical data, ask AI to generate possibilities humans haven't considered. Calculation checking, absolutely, everything. The Apollo story is not a celebration of doing things without technology. It's a celebration of what happens when knowledgeable, adaptable, determined human beings use everything available to solve a problem that matters. Those engineers understood systems well enough to recognize the danger. They had expertise to work inside constraints, and they communicated across a huge distance while people were under enormous pressure. And when the original mission became impossible, they didn't sit there mourning the plan. They found the next problem they could solve. That's hard. That's human. And if they had access to AI, it would have simply joined the team. Our students already have that new teammate. The question is what kind of humans we're helping them become before they hand it to the problem. I don't think education in the age of AI should shrink. I think its purpose becomes clearer. A polished artifact is no longer enough evidence that learning happened. Knowing facts matters, but so does knowing what those facts mean. Technical skills matter, and so do judgment and context. And making things easier isn't always the same as making people better. That means teachers have an enormous role right now. We, as teachers, get to design places where students are still expected to wonder, where they sometimes sit with the problem before the answer arrives, where they build something and then discover why it broke, where another person's perspective can change their own. And where AI isn't treated as either a monster we have to keep outside the classroom or a magic button we press so nobody has to struggle anymore. It's a tool, an extraordinary one, and we can teach students to use it with intention. So I keep thinking about that day in Germany. Tabby and I standing inside this castle, looking at what human beings were capable of creating long before either of us could ask a chatbot how to do it. How did we do this before ChatGPT? Somehow, we figured things out. We learned from each other, accumulated knowledge, became good at difficult things, and every so often, when the plan completely fell apart, we made something out of cardboard and tape and found a way home. Now we have AI. That doesn't make the human story less interesting. I think it makes the next chapter potentially extraordinary. But we have to develop the person as deliberately as we develop their ability to use the tool. Because our students will have access to more intelligence than any generation before them. What I hope they also have is heart, real capability, deep curiosity, enough knowledge to have judgment, and especially the courage to act when there isn't a perfect answer. And teachers who help them learn when to ask a machine for help and when to think one more step for themselves is important. Our students will have AI. They will grow up with capabilities we can barely imagine today. So maybe the most important question isn't what will AI be able to do? It is what kind of human will be holding it. Because AI will expand what our students can do. Education helps shape who they become. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Leandra. Thank you for everyone joining us today. Our last session with the team from Imagy Labs will be in 2 weeks on August 26th. I will be sure to follow up this call with the recording of Leandra's session as well as the previous two from Srinidhi and Dan. And we'll ensure you have the Zoom link for the August 26th session. Thanks again for everyone joining us. If you have any questions, you can find us. I'll put our email in the chat. Please just let us know. We'll be happy to get back to you. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Have a great evening, everyone.